Thanks very much for being here. I'm surprised that so many of you are here today on a really sunny, happy Friday. My name is Mete Atamel. I'm a developer advocate at Google. I'm based in London, and as you can guess from my accent, I wasn't born in London. I was born in Cyprus, which is an island, as you know, in the Eastern Mediterranean, where we have 300 days of sunshine. And from there, I moved to London, where we have 300 days of rain. You might wonder, why did you do that? I still ask that same question to myself, but we all make mistakes, I guess. So today, I'm going to talk about Knative. Before I start my talk, a couple of things. If you want the slides and if you want all the demos and more, that's the link, GitHub, and there's a QR code. So that's the only picture that you want to take if you want the slides and the demos. And the other thing, before I start my talk, and I'll just wait for a couple of seconds for people to take the picture. I really like to help startups, and I'm working at Google Cloud, and Google Cloud has a startup program. So if you're an eligible startup, you can get $3,000, $20,000, or $100,000 credits. And I know when you're starting a startup, you want to save money, so it's a good way of getting started. So in the next slide, I have this link, bit.ly GCP for startups. You can't see that much, but it's basically GCP for startups. If you go there, you can apply and get credits for your startup. So I always mention this in my talks, even though I don't work for Google Cloud for startups, because I like to help startups. OK. Now let's start talking about Knative. But before I start, I want to get an understanding of who you are. So who is here a software engineer writing code or someone in operations like DevOps running services? Anyone? Yeah, OK, maybe half of the people. So out of those people, who knows or uses containers like Docker? A few people, OK. So out of these people, who is using or at least heard of Kubernetes? OK. So this is my target audience. The rest of you, I don't know what you want to do. No, hopefully you will also learn something. But what I'm assuming is that you are someone who is a backend developer writing services maybe locally or in the cloud, who is either using containers or thinking about using containers, and who is either using Kubernetes or thinking about Kubernetes. And maybe you heard about Knative, and you are just curious what this Knative thing is. What can it do for me? So that's my target audience. But for the rest of you, hopefully you will also learn something, because at the beginning of my talk, I will cover the basics of Knative, why you should care about Knative, and then I'll talk about what is Knative, and then I'll show a lot of demos as well, because my talks are usually demo-driven. So we'll see how that goes. OK? Let's see if my clicker works. My clicker doesn't work. It's OK. I can do this. So what is Knative? Knative is Kubernetes-based open-source building blocks for serverless. And if you know anything about Kubernetes, this sentence doesn't make sense. Because in Kubernetes, there's nothing serverless about it. In Kubernetes, you have nodes. These nodes are either virtual machines or they are physical machines where you schedule containers on top of, right? So there are servers that you need to think about. And here, like we are talking about something that says Kubernetes, make Kubernetes serverless. But that's the point of Knative. It tries to make Kubernetes a serverless platform. Now, when we talk about serverless, first we have to define what we mean by serverless, because depending on who you talk to, you get different definitions. But for me, when we think about an ideal serverless framework, there are certain things that I look for. First of all, when I'm writing against a serverless framework or a service, I shouldn't worry about the infrastructure. I shouldn't care about the service. Maybe my service is deployed to containers running on VMs. Maybe it's deployed on some other service, but it shouldn't be my problem. Someone should maintain them. Someone should figure out how to deploy my service, get the traffic to it. Someone should figure out how to scale my service. I should only worry about writing my code and deploying it, right? So no service for me. Secondly, if you are a C# and .NET developer like me, you are probably used to writing ASP.NET Core web applications nowadays. Or if you are a Java developer, you are probably used to writing Spring Boot applications. So whatever framework you're using, you should be able to use that framework in the serverless service that you're using. You shouldn't have to rewrite things, or you shouldn't have to use a special framework so that your code is running in a serverless way, right? So it has to be idiomatic. The third thing is, when we talk about serverless, it's usually event-driven. So you have your code deployed, or you have your container deployed, and something triggers that, right? It's either a message that you listen to, or it's a HTTP call, or something else, like something triggers your code. It's asynchronous. It's not a synchronous call usually. And finally, you want your serverless code to be portable. So once you write it for one platform, let's say you write it and deploy it to Google Cloud, ideally, you should be able to take that and deploy it to other places like Azure or Amazon or locally as well. You shouldn't have to rewrite your code that much so that it's portable. So these are the things that I look for in an ideal serverless framework. And thankfully, I think Knative does a pretty good job of checking these boxes. And hopefully, I will convince you as we go along. Kubernetes, so just to cover Kubernetes briefly for those of you who might not know. So back in the day, we used to write code and deploy it on physical machines, and it was our responsibility to maintain that service. It was our responsibility to maintain the machine and everything. Nowadays, things changed. So first, you start with a container. So you take your code and containerize it using Docker. Then you need to host the container image somewhere public, so in a registry. This can be Docker Hub, or it can be a Google Container Registry. Then you usually use Kubernetes to manage your container. So in Kubernetes, you create what's called a pod template. A pod is a single unit that gets scheduled in Kubernetes. It's usually a single container, but it can be multiple containers that are scheduled together as well. Then you tell Kubernetes what you want to be true. So you say, in this case, I want 3 replicas. So I want 3 copies of these pods running at all times. Then Kubernetes looks at the nodes that you have. These nodes are virtual machines in the cloud, or they can be physical machines if you're running it locally. And then Kubernetes figures out where should these pods be scheduled, and it also makes sure that your pods are running. So if any of these nodes go down, Kubernetes will figure that out, and it will reschedule your pods. So scheduling your containers and making sure that they're running, now it's not your problem anymore. It's Kubernetes' problem, which is great. Now, once your pods are running, you can label them. And then once you label them, you can group them into what's called Kubernetes services. So you have a service, and this service has a stable virtual IP or a domain name, and people from outside will get to your service, and from there, it will get to your pods. So in this new containerized world, a microservice ends up becoming a combination of your code via containers and a combination of what Kubernetes provides with replication controllers, pods, and services, right? So when you think about it, as application developers, we don't care about, this still doesn't work. We don't care about any of this, right? I mean, this is all nice, and I'm happy that Kubernetes exists, and it takes care of all these details for me. But as an application developer, I have enough things to worry about. I need to write code to solve problems that my PM is asking me to solve, right? And all these infrastructure problems shouldn't be my problem. So that's why application developers, they love serverless, because serverless enables you to actually focus on your code and not so much on the infrastructure. At the same time, the operators, the DevOps people, they love Kubernetes because Kubernetes gives them a high-level API and constructs that make sure that these containers are scheduled properly and they're running properly. So there's this tension between application developers and operators, and that's the whole point of Knative. Knative tries to bring these two worlds together. It's an open source project on GitHub, and it's a set of components, basically, serving, eventing, and build that we'll go through, that basically gives you the building blocks to do serverless on Kubernetes without having to build them yourself. It came from Google, but now a bunch of companies, Red Hat, IBM, and many others, they're contributing to it. So Knative aims to be the serverless framework when you're running on Kubernetes. Okay, so hopefully this kind of answers what is Knative and why you should care about it. Now the Knative stack kind of looks like this. First, you have the platform, so everything runs on Kubernetes. Then Knative relies on a gateway. So Knative doesn't really handle the traffic and how the traffic is routed within your cluster. Instead, it relies on either Istio or something else called Glue for networking, for gateway. Just to let you know, Istio has been the de facto gateway that the Knative project depends on. But in the latest version of Knative 0.5, they added support for Glue, which is a much more lightweight gateway that people use. But if you decide to use Glue, it's lightweight, but it doesn't support Knative eventing yet, so you have to keep that in mind. Now, once you have the Kubernetes running and you have the gateway running, you have the primitives of Knative. So you have the build, serving, and eventing. You can install them all at once if you need them, or you can install them one by one. So it depends on what you need and what you want to use. And the idea of Knative is that you wouldn't use it directly yourself, but instead, you would rely on other products built on top of it. For example, on Google Cloud, there's something called Google Cloud Run, which is a totally managed way of deploying containers in a serverless way, and it's built on top of Knative. And then there are other products from other companies that are also being built on top of Knative. So the Knative provides the building blocks, and these products provide the developer experience on top of that. Okay? So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to show the Knative open source as if you're using it just the Knative yourself. So I'm going to show you how to install it yourself and how to run it yourself. And then I'm going to also show you briefly how it will look like on Google Cloud so that you get an idea of what the developer experience looks like when you want to run on Google Cloud. But that is totally optional. You can use Knative as is yourself. All right? So how do you get started with Knative? Well, first, you need a Kubernetes cluster. So you can either install Kubernetes cluster yourself in your own cluster, or on Google Cloud, you can use a gcloud command line tool to get a cluster. So in this case, we are saying I want to get a cluster with 3 nodes. So these are 3 worker nodes where I can schedule containers. Is it working? Yes. The zone is Europe West. So with this command, I get a Kubernetes cluster with master managed by Google, and the zone in Europe West, and I have 3 nodes to schedule containers. Then I need to install Istio for my gateway. But before I install Istio, I need to do cluster role binding. This command basically enables Istio to manage the traffic within my cluster. So I'm giving Istio the permission to manage the traffic on my cluster. Next, I install Istio. Again, depending on how you want to do it, there's many different ways of installing Istio. For example, on Google Cloud, you can, with a single command, get a cluster with Kubernetes and Istio already installed. But if you're installing it yourself, you can go to Istio page and download and install it yourself. Or if you're installing Knative, in this case, I'm installing 0.5.0, which is the version before the last version. And it comes with YAML files already for me for Istio, because certain versions of Knative requires certain versions of Istio, and in this case, these YAML files basically do the right thing for me. So I'm installing the right version of Istio with this, and then finally I can install Knative, right? So in this case, I'm installing Knative serving, Knative build, Knative eventing myself. And as I said, you can do it all at once, or you can do it one by one, or you can install one and add one later if you want to. But in this case, I'm installing everything. And actually, let me show you. So I have this is Google Cloud Console, and I'm in Kubernetes Engine, which is the managed version of Kubernetes in Google Cloud. And I already created a cluster, and I call it Knative 0.5, because that's the version that I'm running. So I already set this up so that we don't have to spend time on it. But let's just make sure that everything is actually working. So if I do, let's see. If I do kubectl get pods, and -n means namespace, so everything in Knative gets installed into separate namespaces, which is good because it doesn't interfere with your own workloads. But in this case, I'm checking that Knative build components are running, which is great. And the other one is Knative serving. Those are running as well. And then Knative eventing, those are running as well. So everything is good for our demo, so I'm hopeful that things will work out. All right. So as I mentioned, there's 3 different parts of Knative: serving, eventing, and build. So let's first look at serving. So what is Knative serving? It basically enables you to deploy a Docker container and in a serverless way. And what I mean by in a serverless way is that you deploy your container, all the traffic to the container is set up so people from outside can get to your container. Automatic scaling is set up, meaning your container runs on a single pod initially, but if no one uses it, it will scale down to 0, so it goes away. And if a lot of people use it, it will scale up to n that you define. So automatic scaling is set up. With your container, you get configuration and revision management. So your container has a configuration that you can define. And then when you deploy it, Knative creates a revision for your container. And with that revision, when you deploy a new version, you get a new revision, and the traffic is updated to that revision. And you can do complicated things with that revision. You can do traffic splitting between different revisions. So basically, it enables you to deploy a container, get the traffic to that container, get auto-scaling set up, get configuration and revision management set up, and get traffic splitting rules set up if you want to. Now, this is the terminology for Knative serving. So you start with a service, and this service, it's a Knative service. If you know Kubernetes, there's also something called Kubernetes service in Kubernetes, but this is separate. This is a Knative service that has a configuration that you define. And then once you deploy your service and a configuration, Knative creates a revision, and it also creates a route for that revision, and it will route the traffic to that revision. So by default, everything will go to the new revision. Now, every time you change something about the configuration, for example, the image that your service refers to, or the environment variables, or something like that, Knative will create a new revision, and it will update the route to go to that new revision. That's the default case. But if you want to do something more complicated, where you say, OK, I want to deploy a new revision, but I want to split traffic 50% between the old revision and the new revision, you can do that as well. So Knative service, configuration, revision, and the route are the main things for Knative serving. OK, so let me actually show you this. So if we come back here, let's see where I am. OK. So I have my tutorial, by the way. So if you go to my GitHub page, you see that the slides are here, and my tutorial is here. So I'll just go through some parts of this tutorial with you so that you get an understanding of how it works. So in this case, what I want to do is I want to deploy a really simple application that will just say hello world to me, but we'll deploy it and see what it takes to deploy that application so that you get an understanding. First, this is an ASP.NET Core application, because I'm a C# developer. What I do is I write an ASP.NET Core app, I create a Docker image out of it, and I push that image to Docker Hub. So that's what I'm doing here. Then I need to create a Knative service, and for that, I create a YAML file. Now, in this YAML file, first thing that you're going to realize is that this is a V1. So this is a Knative V1 API, so I'm using Knative API. And the kind of service, it has a name, and I'm deploying it into the default namespace. Now, this is a configuration of my service. And this part is important. Run latest means that when I deploy this service, it will get all of the traffic. So by default, it will get all of the traffic. And then this is the rest of the configuration. Now, the first part is the image. So this is the image that I push to Docker Hub. So hello world C# V1, version 1. And then I'm also passing in some environment variables. In this case, the name is target, and the value is C# sample V1. I'm going to read this and print it out. It's very simple, but I like to keep things simple so that you get an understanding of how things work. Now, I apply the service, and I'm going to watch some things. So let's do this. So first, let me watch. So I'm watching the pods, the Knative service, the Knative configuration, the Knative revision, and the Knative route. So everything that I talked about, I'm watching them. Now, you'll realize that there's some pods running. These are the things that I'm going to need later, but I set them up already, so you can ignore them for now. But what I want to do is I want to do kubectl apply service v1. So I'm deploying my service. Now, this creates the service. And if you go back here, you'll see that I already have a pod that's being initialized and running. I have a service that's been created, Knative service. I have a configuration. I have a revision. And actually, if you make this a little bit bigger, you should see that, maybe a little bit bigger. Yeah, we also have a route. So all the stuff that I talked about, we already have it. Now, how do I get to my service? To get to the service, you need to go through Istio, because Istio is the gateway managing my traffic. And in Istio, there's something called Istio Gateway that has a public IP, and you get through that IP. So in this case, I can curl to that IP, Istio ingress IP, but I need to also specify which service in what namespace I want to get to. So in this case, I'm saying this is my service, and this is the in default namespace. So that's what you would do normally if you haven't set up your own domains. Of course, you can configure your own domains if you want to, and I explain here how to do that. But for demo purposes, I am using something called nip.io. Nip.io is a dummy domain service where it enables you to basically pass in domains like this that will map to this IP. So I'm using that as a demo in my configuration. But eventually, what this means is that I can do something like this. So let's do that and see what we get. So I'm basically curling as if I have a domain name with hello world C#. And then it will say hello C# sample v1. I mean, it's not a big deal. It's just a hello world. But what this means is that we made a connection from client to a container running in the cloud. And then all the details of the networking is taken care of for me, and my pod is running, so everything is good. Now, as I mentioned, every time you change the configuration, Knative creates a new revision, right? So let's just let me just remind you that. OK. Is Wi-Fi working? Oh, Wi-Fi is not working. Oh, it's back. All right, just one sec. OK, cool. All right. It's good to stay awake, right? Anyway, so every time you change the configuration, it creates a new revision. So for example, in this case, let's update our service. And instead of saying passing in C# sample v1 as the environment variable, let's pass in v2. So we are just changing the environment variable and see what happens. So I come back here, and instead of applying service v1, let's apply service v2. And then you will see that immediately this creates a new pod. So a new container is being created for me. And a new revision is also created. So this is a revision 2. And then once this pod is running, now it's being initialized, when we do a curl, we'll get to the new revision because we updated the route to always go to the latest one, right? So this is running, and if you do a curl to that one, we say, oh, hello, C# v2. So that's how easy it is to update things in terms of configuration. Now, if you want to update your code, what you need to do is you need to, first of all, change your code. So in this case, I'm changing my code from hello to bye. So instead of saying hello world, I'll say bye. And then I will push a new image to the Docker Hub. So in this case, I'm calling it the same name, but I'm giving it v3, version 3. Then I go to my service, and then I change my image from v1 to v3. And then I apply the change, right? So same as before. Let's do this and see what happens. All right, it's configured, and you'll, again, see that a new pod has been created, it's initialized, and then once it's done, if we do a curl, now it's running, and now it says bye, right? So as you can see, like, things are really easy to update. But normally, if you're running things in production, you wouldn't just update your code just like that. Hopefully not. What you should be doing is that you should probably deploy a new revision and let it get a certain percentage of the traffic, let's say 10% or 20%, test it out, make sure that it works, and then upgrade to that revision, right? That's the right way of doing things. And you can do that with Knative. So what you can do is, red-green deployments or traffic splitting, depending on what you want to call it. But you basically go to your service, and then instead of doing run latest, we say release. So here we are saying that we're going to do a release with 2 revisions, right? And then we list the revisions here. So in this case, revision 1 and revision 4. And then we also specify a percentage. In here, we say rollout %20. So what this means is that this first revision is my existing revision. It will get 80% of the traffic. This 4th revision is the new revision that I'm deploying. It will get 20% of the traffic. And this configuration here is for my new revision that I'm deploying, right? That's the way it works in Knative. So let's apply this. So service v4. Oh, and then one thing I forgot is that when you look at our revision numbers, let's make this a little bit bigger. When you look at our revision numbers, they're hash codes. They're not 001 or 004. So I need to actually copy these hash codes properly. So let me just copy this. This is the first one. And come here and replace this. And then I need to also change the, well, let's use, where's the 4th? I need to. All right, this is the 4th one. So I should be using the correct revisions. So replace that and save it. And come back here, apply again, configured. And now I need to hit my service to see the changes. So let me make this a little bit smaller. And then let me copy a curl command. So what I'm doing here is that I'm in a for loop. I'm just sending some curl commands. So let's do that. And what we expect to see is that 80% of the time, version 1 should get the traffic. 20% of the time, it should be version 4. So you see version 1, version 1, version 1. And at some point, it should say version 4 if things worked. But I'm not seeing it. I don't know. Is it working? Oh, it's always version 1. Oh, maybe version 4 is not being created. Oh, OK. One more time. I'll try one more time. All right. Did I not save it? Maybe something is messed up. But basically, believe me that it works. If you go through my demo, it works. Usually, it's version 1. And some of the time, it should be version 4. Oh, there you go. Version 4. OK. So I told you. And then, so this is traffic splitting between an existing revision and a new revision. But if you want to split traffic between two existing revisions that you already deployed, it's very simple, just like before. But instead of pointing to a new revision, you basically point to an existing revision here. That's the whole difference. OK, and one thing that you're going to realize is that if you look at our pods, that we only have actually, we only have 2 pods running right now for Hello World C#, right? Version 3 and version 4. And what happened to version 1 and version 2? They went away because no one is using them, right? Because auto-scaling scales them down. But all of this is configurable. So if we go back to here, configure auto-scaling section, in here, I have a service. I call it sleeping service. It basically, when it gets a request, it sleeps so that I can simulate kind of load my service doing something. And then I'm going to show auto-scaling. So what you can do is that you can come here, and you can say, you can configure auto-scaling. But before I do this, let me deploy my service so things are running. And then I'll come back to that. So let's go up, sleeping service, kubectl apply, service. So that's deployed. And let's just look at the pods now. kubectl get pods. Now you can see that I have 1 sleeping service running right now. And let me send some traffic to it, and then I will talk, and then we'll come back. To send traffic, I use a tool called Fortio. It's a load testing tool. And I start that. Oh, it didn't work. I didn't copy something. Let me try one more time. All right. Whew. OK, so that started, and now I can talk about it, and then we'll come back. So auto-scaling by default is like this. It's concurrency-based auto-scaling, meaning each pod will get 100 requests at the same time. And then if you have more than 100, then it will spin a new pod. That's how auto-scaling works. And then the minimum and the maximum scale is configurable. By default, there is no minimum scale is 0, so meaning your service goes down to 0. And maximum scale is infinite, so you can scale up to whatever you want. But you usually want to set this to something like 1 minimum scale if you want a pod running at all times, or a maximum scale, something like 5. You should always have a max. So that's concurrency by auto-scaling. In this case, what I'm doing is that I'm changing the number of requests to 1, so that my service will have 1 request at the same time. That way I can show you auto-scaling. So when I hit it with Fortio, we'll see many of them scaled. And I'm setting the maximum scale to 5, meaning I'll only have 5 pods running at all times when we scale up. There's also CPU-based auto-scaling. So you can do CPU-based auto-scaling, basically. And you can also plug in your own auto-scaling if you want to, right? You don't have to use concurrency or CPU-based auto-scaling. You can write code and scale that way as well. So that's how you can configure auto-scaling. And then if everything worked, what's happening? Our sleeping service is still being, let's do get pods. Yeah, you can see that we have 5 sleeping services scaled up because we are doing a load testing. So if I kill this, let's kill it. And then later, I can show you that this will scale down to 1 because I have minimum scale at 1. All right, so that's what Knative serving is. Next, I want to show you, by the way, you can integrate Knative serving with pretty much anything because it's a public endpoint. And in this case, I have a demo. Maybe I'll show you that. I integrated with Twilio. Anyone here used or heard of Twilio? Yeah, 1 person, 2. So Twilio is great. In Twilio, you can get a phone number, and then you can write applications for the phone number. So if someone calls that number, you can call some code that does something. Or if someone sends an SMS message, you can reply that message using your code. So what I do in this case is that I get a Twilio number, and then when a user sends a message to that number, it will call my Knative service, and my Knative service will reply back, right? So to show you how this works, let's take a look. By the way, this is Twilio console, and this is my UK number. Feel free to call or send a message, because I won't be the one answering. It's Knative that's going to be answering you. But for voice, we'll say if a call comes in, make a call to here, which is Twilio's default endpoint. So I haven't changed that. But then if someone sends me a message, we will make a call to here. So this is my Knative service that I'm going to deploy, right? So that's how you set it up. It's very easy. And then what I do in this case is that I set it up this way. I write my code, and in my code, I'm using the Twilio C# library, and then I'm saying I create a controller called SMS controller that will, so every time there's a request to /SMS, it will go here, and then I will get the incoming message, the SMS message, and I'll create a response, and then in the response, I'll just say the Knative copycat says, and I'll echo back the message. That's it, really. I'll just echo back the user's message, and then build my image, then create a service, point to that image, deploy that image, and test it out, right? So let me see if this is going to work. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. So we'll see. And the reason why it doesn't work is that because of my phone and roaming and all that kind of stuff, not because my code doesn't work. It always works. No. So I deploy my service, and let's make sure that, yeah, it's being initialized. So let's wait a little bit more, initializing. OK, it's running. Then what I have here is I'm looking at Android web. So I'm looking at my phone messages from the web. And this is my Twilio number. And as you can see, I tested before. By the way, at some point, my service got crazy, and I keep getting these messages from Krakow when I was doing this talk last time. But here, let's just say, hello from Shift in Split. I'm sending the message. It goes to Twilio number. From Twilio, it will make a webhook call to my code in Knative. And then there we go. The Knative copycat says, hello from Shift in Split, right? So my code responded. So as you can see, you can pretty much integrate Knative with anything because it's a public endpoint that it provides. All right. And then finally, I should mention Cloud Run. So far, what we looked at is Knative everywhere, right? So everywhere you have Kubernetes running, you will have these Knative capabilities that I talked about. But then you need to worry about setting up a cluster, like Kubernetes cluster. You need to worry about installing Istio. You need to worry about installing Knative. So there's a lot of things that you need to do before you get going, right? Whereas on Google Cloud, there's something called Cloud Run. That's basically a managed version of Knative. So the way it works in Cloud Run, let me show you this, is that, first of all, Cloud Run, it was just announced last month. So because of that, it's only available in US Central 1 region. So I need to switch to a project there. Let me do that. So here I'm just switching to a project in US Central. And then Cloud Run doesn't support Docker Hub yet. So I cannot point to my image in Docker Hub. So what I need to do is I need to push my image to Google Container Registry, which is kind of like Docker Hub, but it's for your own Google Cloud project. So that's what I'm doing here. With this command, I'm pushing my image to Google Container Registry. And then to deploy my service, I run this. So let's do that. I come here and just say gcloud beta run deploy and just point to my image, right? So this is same as before. Like it's doing the same things as Knative. It's creating a new revision. It's updating the traffic, routing the traffic to that. So it's deploying my container exactly the same way, except it's fully managed. I don't have to worry about all the stuff that I talked about so far. The developer experience is much nicer. So as this is happening, let me go back to my console and show you how this looks like. Oh, first I need to switch my project. So Cloud Run Atamel. And then if we go to Cloud Run here, you can see I have a few services, but Hello World C# is the one that we are deploying. And then you can see that I have many revisions, right? So I deployed it many times, but this one was just deployed now. It gives me a URL, so I don't have to worry about domains. And if I hit this URL, it will say the very exciting Hello World again. But the point is that it's fully managed. I don't have to worry about it. All I need to worry about is that push my image and point and deploy that image, and everything is done for me. So that's the kind of experience you can get with Knative on Google Cloud. So before I forget, let me switch back to my other project, because I always forget that, and it gets me into trouble. So Knative. All right. Yeah, it should be good now. So that's Knative serving. In the last 9 minutes, I need to cover Knative eventing and Knative build. So I'll be speaking even faster. Sorry about that. But I want you to understand the basics. And what Knative eventing does is that Knative eventing, it enables you to connect event sources to event consumers with some kind of workflow in the middle. That's all it does. And in terms of event sources, you can listen a bunch of events. So you can listen Google Cloud PubSub events. You can listen GitHub events. You can listen Kubernetes events. You can listen cloud storage events. So if someone saves an image, you can get a notification for that, stuff like that. And this is not the full list. The full list is down there. And in a nutshell, this is how things work in Knative eventing. So you have sources that listen for external events. So if you are listening, for example, GitHub events, these sources will read the GitHub events. Then it will change these events into what's called cloud events. Cloud event is an open source event definition. So everything gets converted into a cloud event. Then it goes into a broker. Broker is the default thing that listens for messages in Knative. It's usually one per namespace. And then once the message is in broker, it will go through a trigger. So a trigger connects a Knative service with the broker, right? That's what it does. It makes the connection. And this trigger also can do some kind of filtering, right? So if this service is only interested in red messages, then it will do filtering for those messages, and this service can listen for other types of messages, right? So that's kind of the flow in Knative eventing. As I mentioned, you can listen many kinds of events, but they all end up getting converted into cloud events. And the cloud event will have a section called data, and in this data, you'll have the actual event that you're listening, in this case, GitHub. And the broker is basically one per namespace that listens for messages, and then it passes that to trigger, and the trigger can do some kind of filtering if you want, and then eventually connects to a service, okay? So let me show you one example of this. For example, in this case, what I want to do is I want to connect Google Cloud Storage to Google Cloud Vision API, all right? These are two separate services that have nothing to do with each other, but I want to connect them in a loosely coupled way using Knative eventing. So the way this works is that when I save Google Cloud Storage, it's a place where you can save any kind of files. I create a bucket here, and then I save an image there, and then I enable notifications on this bucket, meaning every time I save some file into this bucket, it will send a message to a Google Cloud PubSub topic. So that sends a message to a Google Cloud PubSub topic, and then I make Knative listen that topic, so it will read those messages from PubSub topic. Then from Knative eventing, we make a call through broker and through trigger to a Knative service, and then the Knative service can do whatever it wants with that message, but in this case, I'm making a call to Vision API. Vision API, it's the machine learning API in Google Cloud, where you can pass in images, and it will analyze and extract labels out of that image. So what I'm doing is that I'm saving an image in a bucket, and in the end, I get the labels out of that image using Knative in the middle. So how do we do this? We do this, let's see. I always have to refer to my tutorial. So I have a Hello World eventing sample that you can go through, but we won't have time here. I have another translation API sample, which is pretty cool. You can translate languages using it, using Knative eventing. But the Vision API is this one. So basically, first thing that you need to do is eventually your service will get cloud events, right? Everything gets converted into cloud events. So here I have the code to parse cloud events. And then in my cloud event, there's different kinds of events you can listen, but the event that I'm interested in is called object finalize. So when an image is saved, it's the type of the event is object finalize, so I'm listening for that kind of messages. Then from the cloud event, I extract the URL for my image, and then I create a Vision client. So this is a client that I'm going to use to make an API call to my Vision API, and then I just say, can you extract labels out of this image URL? So I'm passing the image URL, and it will give me the labels. Each label will have a score, because it's machine learning, so it will be like 80 or 90% sure of what the label is. I order by the score, and I just print out the scores in the logs, right? So I build my image, I push it to the Docker Hub, I create a service file, and I point to my image, and I also make sure that there's always one pod running, just to make sure. And then I also create a trigger. In this trigger, I connect my broker to my service, okay? So I mean, I know I'm going really fast, but we don't have that much time. But just to deploy this and show you that it works, so let's go to eventing, and let's go to vision. And then I will apply my service. So this will create my service, and it will create a trigger that will connect my service to eventing. And if everything is running, let's make sure kubectl get pods. So my vision is being initialized. And what I want to do is I want to look at the logs. So let me just get the logs for that. So I will just copy this, come back here, and copy my pod ID. Oh, it's still initializing, so we have to wait a little bit. OK, it's running now. So now my service is waiting, like it's not doing anything, right? Now what I want to do is I want to go to Google Cloud, to storage, switch my project, go here, cloud storage. I already have a bucket that I set up for Knative, so this is the bucket where I can save things. And I already have my image, so let's overwrite it. So I'm going to go here, let's pick an image, eventing, vision. That's me. So let's pass my image, see what happens. So I'm saving my image to a bucket that will trigger a pop-up message to a topic. Knative will listen to that message, and it will pass it to Knative service. And from the Knative service, we'll make a call to Vision API. And eventually, if everything worked, yes, in the logs, we see that we received the cloud event with the data, base64 encoded. And then we made a call to Vision API. And then it says forehead, chin, facial hair, beard, so it's me. Basically, it kind of extracted these labels from me. All right, I have 2 minutes, which is not enough time at all for my build section, but I will just cover it like really briefly so that you have an idea of what it is. What is Knative build? I mean, it's great to do serving. It's great to do eventing, but you also need to build your code and host your code in a public place, right? So what Knative build enables you to do is that it enables you to go from source code to a container image in a public repository like GitHub or Google Container Registry. That's all there is to it. There's some primitives like build. So build is one or more steps that you can define, and they're executed in that order. Build template are the templates that you can create or you can use from your own builds. Builder is things that you can use to build, like container builders and other things. And finally, the service account is a thing that you can use to authenticate with Docker Hub and other places. Just to show you one example of this in the last minute or so, for example, let's kick off a build, and then I'll show you the build file. So if I go to build, I have some YAML files, so let's just say, and all of these builds happen within your Kubernetes cluster. So I'm building and pushing to Google Container Registry. So it started, and then if I come back here, and if I do kubectl get build, you can see that I have a build that's been pending. And if I do kubectl get pods, you will see that there is a build pod that's being initialized, and it will do my build, right? And what this build looks like is that if we come back here, so this build YAML file, it kind of looks like this. You have your build. You point to your source. So in this case, I'm pointing to my GitHub tutorial here. And then you define your steps. You can have as many steps as you want, but in this case, it's very simple. One step that says build and push. And I'm using a project called Canico. It's an open source project from Google that you can use to build images using from your pods. And I'm pointing to my Docker file, and I'm pointing to my destination. In this case, destination is gcr.io, Knative Atamel, so it's my project. So I'm basically building and pushing to that location. If you want to do push to Docker Hub, it's more complicated because you need to authenticate. What that means is that you need to create a secret in Kubernetes, and that's how you do it in Kubernetes. Then you need to create a service account that uses that secret, like this. And then finally, in your build, you need to refer to that service account like this, and it will authenticate with Docker Hub. And there's much more here, so I'll let you look at my tutorial if you're interested. But I want to finish my talk with, this is a Knative tutorial link if you are interested. Knative has a new web page called knative.dev that you can go. And that's all I have. I don't think we have any time for questions, but I'm going to be around. So if you have any questions, come and find me. Thanks very much for listening.